Brendan, welcome to another episode of the TFL Classics podcast. And what are we discussing today?
Thanks. Well, you're welcoming just me, but I would like to also welcome all of you that are listening and or watching this podcast.
All three of them out there.
I think we got a couple thousand at least.
We're doing better. We're doing better. Yeah,
we're doing okay.
Big thank you to everybody who continue to listen and support the podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about everything classic cars. Sometimes get the facts right, mostly get the facts wrong. But if you want to stay tuned to new cars, of course, my dad and Nathan have that discussion as well. And then Andre talks about trucks. So we're the classics guys. We like the weird old stuff.
Yeah, we like to slot in right between the truck podcast and that car podcast to kind of shake things up a little bit for you. Instead of hearing about the brand new, latest and greatest stuff, we want to give you a little take back to the old days of the classics.
Yeah, but what we found is not too old, because if we go pre-1980s, everyone tunes out. All three people leave.
Yeah.
So we focus on the 90s and the 2000s, because 2000s now are classics. Believe it or not.
Yeah. 20 years ago.
Wow, incredible. But let's talk a little bit about what we had for breakfast the other day. Because Brendan completely astonished the entire team when he decided to put ranch dressing on hash browns.
Oh, this is where we're going. Okay. Yeah, so Tommy was gracious enough to take out the team after filming to a brunch-ish kind of dinner. Or what am I saying here? I just combined all three meals into one sentence somehow. But yeah, no, a brunch-ish kind of meal. And we all decided to get breakfasty kind of stuff. And I got hash browns with corned beef hash. And I asked for it extra crispy, and I put a little bit of ranch on it and a lot of hot sauce.
You see, I eat ketchup with my hash browns, and in a previous episode, Brendan was giving me heck about putting ketchup on hash browns, and then there he is, just rubbing ranch dressing all over that puppy. That was horrible.
It's so good. Everybody at the table was looking at me with like stares of horror. Like, what did you just do to those hash browns? Oh. And I'm just over here enjoying my meal, and I think some of the commenters kind of are more towards the ranch side than the ketchup side.
Come on. I still withhold that if you go to a breakfast place and they have the little condiment station there, you'll see hot sauce, jellies, salt, pepper, ketchup, no ranch dressing.
If you saw ranch sitting out on the table, you probably wouldn't want to use it because ranch is better when it's refrigerated. If not, I think it needs to be refrigerated.
If I saw ranch dressing sitting on the table at a breakfast restaurant, I would just leave. There's no excuse for that.
No.
That is clearly a breakfast restaurant that doesn't understand the fine taste in breakfast food. But Brendan, I have some exciting news.
Okay.
So as you know, we have a Patreon page where people can help and support the team and help and support the podcast, keep this podcast alive, because seriously, it makes no money. But of course, we need to pay for our time somehow. And you guys have been amazing on the Patreon page. And we have some questions.
Ooh, nice. I'm excited.
Some classic car questions on the Patreon page. And we're starting out with Duncan.
Okay.
So he's been a patron for some time now, and he says, "Hello, I have a question that I'm wondering if Tommy and Brendan might have a chance to look at. I am looking for an older car to commute back and forth to work, about 50 miles round trip. The smart buy, in my mind, would probably be a pre-2013 Honda Fit or a Toyota Echo or Yaris. However, I'm also looking at something in the all-wheel drive category to give me a little more stability in the snow and freezing rain. I live where we have an abundance of both in winter. I really like the first generation Honda CR-V, and I also admire the first gen RAV4 as a fairly reliable, if somewhat ugly, all-wheel drive vehicle. Since Brendan and Tommy have vast experience with older vehicles, I was wondering if you could rank the following cars. Best bang for the buck from 1 to 4.
Okay.
Ready for the cars?
I'm ready.
Honda Fit, Toyota Yaris or Echo, first gen CR-V, first gen RAV4.
I have a question though. Did you think about this?
I did.
What, do you want to rank it?
Yes, I have.
So you want me to just throw it out there, or do you want to start?
I can start.
Okay.
So I personally have a favorite of those vehicles.
Okay.
I am a sucker. First of all the vehicles, great choice.
Yeah.
Except for the Echo.
That's
not
funny.
A fan of the Echo.
It's the last on my list as well.
Is it really?
Yeah, and it's not because it's necessarily like an unreliable vehicle. It's just when you sit in an Echo, and do yourself a favor if you're out there shopping, sit in an Echo. They are just like the cheapest of cheap interiors you could possibly get. They are so bare bones and so minimalist. I mean, if that's your thing, then the Echo is your car. But if this is your only car, you're going to want at least some creature comforts, right?
Yes, I would agree completely. I mean, the Echo is a fine little automobile. It's going to be very reliable for the most part. But the quality just isn't up to Toyota standards, in my opinion, with the Echo because it was so bare bones. But my number one choice, it's an easy one for me, first-gen Honda Fit.
Well, we have the same number one choice.
I love the first-gen Honda Fit.
Me too.
Genuinely, my grandma bought one brand new back in 2008, 2007, and it has been dead reliable, fun to drive.
Yep.
Little zippy 4-cylinder engine. I think it's like a 1.5 or a 1.6. It's got the most roomy interior of any vehicle of that size, with these magic seats that fold completely out of the way, tuck into different cubbies you didn't know existed, and you have a completely flat load floor. Great little car.
Especially if you can find them in a stick shift.
Yes.
They are actually like one of those cars that you'll get in and drive, and it will surprise you with how entertaining it is to drive. It's not quite hot hatch level, but it's up there. It's honestly quite fun to drive, and I think it's one of those cars that kind of catches you off guard. You know, you get into it and you think, oh, this is just going to be a boring econo box, but it's not. It's better than that.
I just love them. I really think they're great. The other thing, too, is definitely recommend getting the Sport package, which gave you alloy wheels. It gave you a front lip spoiler, side skirts, rear spoiler, rear fascia, paddle shifters if you got the automatic. Believe it or not, you got paddle shifters in the mid-2000s, and a couple other changes as well. But definitely the top of my list. And I'd recommend getting snow tires because he says he lives in a winter environment.
Sure.
You know, find one with snow tires. Plus, it's the newest car on your list, so you can get, a lot of airbags in that thing compared to the RAV4 and the CRV. Great little car. So what's your number 2 choice?
I think my number 2 choice would have to be the Honda CRV, the first gen. I really like those, actually.
Okay.
I think they're a pretty cool car. I like the way that the interiors are packaged on those with the fold-down armrests, because I think the RAV4 is a little more traditional. As far as, like cars go, it just has kind of your standard center-mounted armrest.
Yep.
But the CRV, the first gens, have kind of always, interested me. I haven't actually owned one, but I have driven a bunch. We did spend some time with the RAV4 first gen. But here's the thing. Both of those are probably going to get at least 10 miles per gallon worse than the Honda Fit. Mm-hmm. And I think the trade-off for getting the all-wheel drive versus the front-wheel drive, it's not as good, or it's not as good of a deal considering you're just adding a little bit for the occasional slippage.
Right.
The vast majority of the time you're going to be driving in front-wheel drive anyways. Might as well just go with the Honda Fit and always reap the benefit of the better MPG.
I think you were spot on. Yeah, I mean, I love the first gen RAV4, especially because it feels like you're driving a fishbowl. It's a good design. It's really small. First gen CRV, fantastic car. Pretty big community built around those cars, too.
Yeah.
Remember the picnic table in the back?
Oh, yeah.
Fold out picnic table. Cool car, but if it's your only car, MPGs are going to be a problem. Both the CRV and the first gen RAV4 by modern standards are woefully underpowered.
Yes.
They are both very, very slow. And for me, I think it's got to be the Fit all the way. And then at the very bottom of my list is going to be the Echo and the Yaris. Both capable vehicles, right? Both can be very reliable, but they didn't have the fun factor of the other three on the list.
There is one car that if I could on your list, I know you asked us to rank these. If I could get rid of that Echo and Yaris and just kind of wipe it right off of your list, I would throw the Honda Element in there. Because I think it'll give you the practicality of an SUV, but it can give you closer MPGs to the Honda Fit, and you can get it in a stick shift, and you can get it in all-wheel drive.
It's a good choice, but they're expensive.
Yeah, they're a little, I mean, if you're looking at a first-gen Honda Fit versus the Honda Element, they're not that much more expensive.
You don't think so?
Not from what I've seen, at least.
Okay. The all-wheel drive in an all-wheel drive state, you're going to pay a premium for.
Well, sure, but if you get the front-wheel drive, they're not too bad as far as price goes.
That's true. Well, Jonathan, I hope that we've answered your question, Duncan. We'll get to Jonathan's question here in a little bit, but let's move on to Brendan's list of affordable performance bargains.
Yeah, so I wanted to create a list for you guys of some cars that I think will give you the lowest 0 to 60 for your dollar. And I was focusing primarily on cars that you can buy for about $15,000 or less and will give you that fizzy feeling when you're driving and give you a little bit of a kick in the back when you hit the throttle pedal. And of course, we made it in our typical form where we picked out 10 of them. Starting with number 10, I've picked the 5th gen Ford Mustang GT, otherwise known as the S197 platform.
Yeah, great choice, Brendan. Built from 2005 through 2014. This is, I think, the most attractive Mustang ever. So they went away from like the 90s kind of blobby look and then to the new edge, and then they went to this retro-styled beast in the early 2000s. 09 and older are going to be the cheaper models. Now, the early ones had the 4.6 liter V8. Not a ton of power, right around 300, which by modern standards is not a ton, but back in the day it was pretty okay. And you could also get the 4-liter V6.
Yeah, I mean the 4-liter V6 puts out 210 horsepower, and they're not bad. You know, if you really have a limited budget, it could be a fun little car. But if we're talking about something that's really going to give you performance, you're going to be hard-pressed to beat the value of that 4.6 V8 because the 4.6s are pretty reliable. They put out a decent amount of horsepower. Now, if you get the newer versions, like 2010 or newer, when they did the facelift, those have a lot more power, but they also bring a lot more money. So I really think if you stick to the 05 to 09 versions, 300 horsepower may not sound like a lot, but these have a really good community around them and can pull a lot of power out with some simple modifications. And not only that, they look good too.
So let's talk about the engines, because I don't fully understand the Ford engine lineup of the late 90s and early 2000s, because there are two primary displacements, 4.6 and 5.4.
Right.
And depending on who you talk to and depending on the year, certain 5.4s with 2 valves, super reliable. Oh my God, they'll go forever. And then add a third one, and oh my God, they just explode all the time.
Right.
So I don't want to speak too much about the reliability of these 5th gen GTs. You can argue that in the comment section below. But regardless, they're pretty affordable still, and they are great. I think collector's items because they look cool. They look different than most cars on the road.
I mean, they're kind of pre-collector status right now.
Pre-collector.
Yeah,
I
but
like that.
they're going to be collector cars for sure. I mean, most Mustangs are. Right? Look at some of the Mustangs from the 90s. Those are just, any nice ones now are shooting up in value. It used to be just Fox bodies were super valuable, but now even the next generation Mustangs and the new Edge Mustangs are starting to get super valuable. So these, it's a good time to get in.
So
because it's before they shoot up.
The age-old question.
Yeah.
Are you getting convertible or coupe?
On these, you got to go with the coupe.
You got to go with the coupe.
Yeah, I just think the convertible looks kind of funky.
You don't want a comfy cruiser?
No. I mean, so I own a Mustang convertible, and it's fine if you get like the base model with the automatic and you just want to cruise around in something that looks stylish. But if you want a performance car, I would get the coupe because these weren't built from the factory with a convertible top. They were built from the factory with a convertible top, but they weren't like designed intentionally with a convertible top. So that when you chop that roof off, they get a little bit wallowy and.
Oh, you're gonna get some people coming after you, Brendan.
Really? You think?
Well, I think they were probably the coupe and the cabriolet were designed simultaneously, but
sure.
I'm sure there's more rigidity in the coupe.
But when you compare it to like a Mazda Miata that was designed from the ground up to be a convertible, right? Those feel a lot more tight and not as wallowy around the turns, Whereas the Mustang was designed to be both. And so you take a lot of that rigidity away when you lop off the roof. And then you add a lot of weight because they try and put it back in by adding rigidity underneath it by like extra bracing and whatnot.
What I always thought was cool about these is if you got the GT trim, you got these big fog lights in the grille.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And you got the 4 headlights in the front. But it's a little deceiving because you could also get a V6 with what I think they called the pony pack. And it gave you fog lights in the grille, but like a slightly different fog light. So you got to be a little careful when you're out there shopping for Mustangs. I want to make sure that you're going out to look at the V8. Would you get the V8 over the 6?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
You have a V6 Absolutely. Mustang convertible.
Well, yeah, I didn't buy that. We inherited that, so it's got sentimental value to us. And honestly, we haven't driven it in like 3 months. So,
Oh no.
yeah, it's probably going to need a jump start. And
Did you fix the transmission?
no.
It's still slipping on you?
Yeah, it's still slipping, and
I thought you
the
said it was
engine
just
doesn't-
low and then they filled it up and it was like, it was fixed and then it wasn't fixed.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's got a lot of miles, right?
It's got a lot of miles, and it's not in the best of I mean, cosmetically it looks pretty good, but mechanically it's just tired.
Brendan bought a new super cheap car.
Yes, I did.
The highest mileage car he's ever owned.
Yes, I have. It's I bought a 1996 Toyota Camry wagon.
I know. When's the last time you saw a Toyota Camry wagon? You know, that's a rare beast.
It is a rare beast, and I think that's what attracted me to it. I mean, in all reality, I didn't even really think too much about it when it was going across the block at the
Tell me
auction.
the story. What drew you to the wagon?
Well, I've always kind of thought that those wagons were interesting looking.
Uh-huh.
And then I realized it's got 2 wipers on the rear rather than 1. And it's got a stowaway third row seat, which it has to be probably one of the last vehicles to have that stowaway third row seat. I don't know of any more modern ones, unless you do, that have come with that, like a regular wagon with the third row. I mean, there's plenty of SUVs with it, but not much else. But anyways, yeah, so I was looking at it, and I've always kind of been drawn to the higher mileage vehicles because they're super cheap, and I think if they're well cared for, you can really get a good bargain. And I drove it for the auction, and it drove fine. You know, I just a little bit around the parking lot, but when the auction actually happened, no one was interested in it.
Like, what do you mean?
Like, as soon as it pulled, like, there was a car before it that everybody was interested in, this Oldsmobile, and as soon as that sold and the Toyota rolls across the auction block, all the dealers just walked away.
Really?
No one was interested, and so the dealer or the auctioneer was like, "All right, can I get $1,500? $1,500?" Nobody. And he drops down to $1,000. Nobody. Drops down to $500. Nobody. And I'm just kind of like looking around, and no one has any interest at all. And I just kind of raised my hand, and I went, "Well, maybe I'd buy it for $500."
Yeah.
Thinking that would start the auction off and start the bidding. And,
Get the bidding rolling.
you know, somebody would bid 600, and then maybe I'd hit at 7. But no, I raised my hand at 500, and the auctioneer just immediately slapped the gavel down and said, "Sold, $500."
Wow. So paint the picture of this Camry wagon. What are we looking at? What kind of condition is a 350,000-mile Camry in?
Surprisingly good condition. It's got a check engine light because of a bad knock sensor,
Okay.
which from what I was reading is fairly simple. It's got an ABS light on, no idea why. One of the power windows doesn't work, and one of the rear wipers doesn't work.
Oh, because it's got 2.
Yeah, so it still has one good rear wiper.
Maybe that's why they put 2.
Yeah.
Just in case one fails. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. But otherwise, everything works as it should. The suspension works good. It's got decent tires on it. The paint's not terrible on it. I mean, it's not great, but it's not terrible. It even has working air conditioning.
Wow.
So
I noticed from a quick glance you're missing 2 hubcaps.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it has the front 2 hubcaps, but it doesn't have the rear 2 hubcaps.
Yes. So is this going to be are you going to restore the Camry wagon? The interior is pretty nice. Like
It
I saw
is.
the seats. It's pretty clean.
Yeah, well, that's actually, I want to ask you, Tommy,
Right.
what should we do with this on the channel? I mean, and the question goes out to you guys as well. What would you like to see us do
The
with this Camry wagon?
350,000-mile Camry wagon.
Yeah,
What kind of tests would you like to see done?
yeah,
Yeah.
I want to know.
It'd be interesting.
I'm open to whatever you guys have ideas for.
Is this the 4-cylinder or the V6?
It's the V6. It's loaded. It's got the 3-liter V6 and the power windows versus the roll-down windows. Yeah.
It's a nice car. I wanted to point out for those of you watching on YouTube, there was a much newer car that still had a third row that faced the back.
Oh, was there?
Yep, and it's the Tesla Model S.
What?
Had a third row, optional third row. Yeah, not a lot of people remember this, but it was genuinely a third row with seatbelts. It looks like roller coaster seatbelts that faced the back.
I didn't know that.
And then they folded down out of the way.
Wow.
Isn't that weird?
That is weird.
Yeah, and it's like, it's technically a hatchback, the Model S, but like
Right.
it looks more like a sedan. But sure enough, there's the optional third row.
So you're like hopping in through the hatchback. That's
You
kinda-
are. That's how you get in.
Yeah.
Well, that's how you get into
I guess
yours,
that is
too.
how I get in mine. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people would tell me that back in the day, everybody had third rows. Like all the old wagons from from the 60s and 70s, right? They all had the third rows facing backwards. And then Mercedes did it, and Volvo did it. I think Volvo did it, yeah. So it was a big thing for a while.
See, to me, I get sick just riding around in the back seat. I can't even imagine also having to face backwards.
It's like a train.
You're just asking for me to get sick on the car ride.
Well, the next performance bargain, and I really want one of these, but I know I shouldn't. It's the E90 BMW 335.
Yeah, these came out in 2006 and were sold through 2011. And yeah, I will say I've driven some of these. I know you're a bigger fan of these than I am because I actually prefer the previous gens, mainly because of the reliability issues that go along with these.
Well, because the previous gens were so reliable, Brendan.
Well, they're more reliable. I wouldn't say they're so reliable, but this is kind of when BMW decided to start throwing turbos on their six cylinders.
Yeah.
Because prior to that, they were just kind of known for their straight sixes.
And like BMW had played around with turbocharging a little bit in the past, like the 2002 turbos. But this was the first time they had a mass market inline six turbocharged engine. And the 335, when it debuted, I remember this, it was a long time ago, but that was such a beast. It was like 300 horsepower or thereabouts through an inline six-cylinder engine, and two turbos, if I remember right.
Yep.
That engine was called the N54. It grew a reputation for having some issues. But rear-wheel drive, manual...
Some issues?
Yeah. High-pressure fuel pumps and maybe some turbocharging things in here and there. But, like, manual transmission, 300 horsepower, and then later, like, 335. The thing was just a beast.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty cool cars. I will say...
Pretty cool cars, Brendan.
So we've driven the Mustang GT at auction, the generation we just talked about, and we've driven the E90 335. And yeah, I know we're up here at elevation where turbos feel faster, but the 335 that we drove felt like way faster than the V8 Mustang. And the V8 Mustang supposedly has the same amount of horsepower, but... I don't know if it's somebody had tuned that one that we drove or if that's just how quick they feel from the factory, but these ones will surprise you with how quick they really do feel once you get in it. I mean, it says on paper 306 horsepower, but if you had told me it was 406 horsepower from the feel of that, I would have believed
Yeah,
you.
they really haul ass. And I think part of that is just due to the torque that they deliver and the way they deliver their torque. But two turbochargers, direct injection system on the N54, and then the N55 replaced that engine, and it was, I think, significantly more durable. But the N54 had a two turbochargers, right? It kind of had, it was called the twin power turbo. But now BMW uses that for their twin scroll turbo. But I think it was like a little turbo and a slightly bigger turbo. And the idea was you'd have like a smaller turbo for lower RPMs than the larger turbo for higher RPMs. And someone can correct me if I'm incorrect about that.
Yeah, and I think in 2010 is when they changed it to a single turbo, if I'm not mistaken.
The twin scroll.
Yeah, that's right.
Remember they went to the twin scroll. I just think ever since I was a little kid though, I've always wanted a car with twin turbos.
Really? Mm-hmm. Well, didn't you guys... Oh, no, wait. I was just going to say you guys had a 300ZX, but that was the NA, wasn't it?
That was an A. Yeah, I've never owned a car with two turbos. Oh. I just think that's
this might be the cheapest way to get a twin turbo, to be honest. They've come down quite a bit.
They're hard to find in good shape. So the tuning community really figured these out, and they were really tuned often and often not very well. So it was easy to get good power out of them, but often that came at the problem of reliability, right?
Yeah.
And so many of them have just been butchered at this point. But we saw one at the auction, pretty high mileage, like 150K, but it was bone stock as far as I could tell.
Yeah.
And that was the one we drove. We were like, holy cow, this thing hauls ass.
Yeah, it seemed pretty reliable. I mean, it seemed like there weren't major issues
thing was
going
running great.
on with it.
Yeah, high pressure fuel pumps were a really big issue with the N54 engine. But I love them. I think they're cool. And I think it's not the best looking 3 Series. I think your beloved E46 is better looking. But I love the way they drive. You know, hydraulic power steering. You can get them in all-wheel drive. You can get them with navigation or with like just the flat dash, right?
Sure.
It's just a good all-around BMW. This is the highlight. And I think like that's the coupe, which is not my favorite design, the E92.
You prefer the sedan?
I like the sedan more.
Oh, okay.
But I think that's a better looking car than almost any new BMW.
Well, yeah, because that's back when the kidney grills were proportioned
correctly to the car.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
Well, Tommy, is it time?
Sometimes it's like an ad, and we do not know, per usual, what the ad is. So surprise us. Maybe it'll be an ad about toilet paper or healthcare. We have no control over the ad.
No idea. Maybe it'll be a ketchup on hash browns ad.
I better be. If it's a ranch on hash browns ad, you have my permission to click out.
Well, either way, we'll be right back. All right, guys, welcome back. And if you are still watching, thanks for watching that.
Or listening.
Yes.
Yeah. And for those of you who had the ketchup on hash browns ad, congratulations. If you had a ranch dressing ad,
congratulations.
I do apologize. Things have gone really badly. Now, number 8 on our list, Brendan.
Yeah, we are going to go with the Nissan 350Z. And there are a lot of different Zs that you could look at, but I do think if you're measuring the best 0 to 60 or best quarter mile time for your dollar, the 350Z is going to be hard to beat. These came out in 2003 and were sold through 2008. And in reality, even the current Z is based off of this exact platform. So if you think about it, you're basically getting a brand new Z for a lot less money.
That's a terrible way of looking at it. It is not at all like the new one. I mean, technically, maybe some of the hard points are similar, but the car is very different. Now, do you like these Zs?
I do. I think the best looking of the Zs is probably the convertible version because I really like those 2 rear humps that are sitting on the back of it. But I do really like these. We're talking about a car that has close to, right around that 300 horsepower mark. Go into the rear wheels. You can get it with a 6-speed manual. And I'm one of those weird people that actually really likes the sound of this VQ engine.
Yeah, you're the only one.
Well, I like it when it's not modified. I like it from its factory sound. I think it's
you like it to sound like a
sound.
Nissan Frontier.
Oh my gosh.
Just...
But I think the exhaust on this sounds a little better than the Nissan Frontier. I mean, they gave it a little bit of a sporty tune.
My issue with the VQ series is when you put an exhaust on it, it sounds exactly like a 4th grader trying to learn the trombone. It says,
well, don't put it. Yeah, stop modifying the exhaust of these 350Zs. And I will say the Infiniti G37 is also, I think, of equal value. They're a little bit heavier, so not quite as fast, hence why I went with the 350Z. But they are basically the same car. It's just the more luxurious version of it, if you could say.
This car was a little bit of a letdown, though, when it debuted. I think compared to like the Z32 generation of Z, the 300ZX. Because that car had twin turbos and 4-wheel steering and all this crazy technology. And then the new Z came out and it was naturally aspirated only, didn't have the 4-wheel steering. But I know there was a lot of excitement initially, and then kind of the excitement faded when these were all drifted into trees and into school zones. But now the excitement's back because I think people are kind of realizing that this was a pretty cool piece of design.
Well, yeah, and now it's getting to the point to where it's hard to find one that hasn't been modified.
And driven sideways through a school zone.
Yeah. And that's why I think they're starting to become collector's items, because the ones that are out there that are factory, that still look really good and still sound like they were meant to sound, I think they're just a cool, timeless design. I think they will go down as such. And I mean, even like the interior on them has kind of a retro, modern look to them. They're a cool car, and they were cheap for so long that the wrong people bought them. And it's bad that they got that. It's a bummer that they got that reputation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they're cool cars, but yeah, they got kind of sucked up by the wrong crowds. We have another question.
Okay.
Coming from Patreon once again, and if you want to support the team, at patreon.com/TFLcar, and we'd love to answer your questions online here because that's one of our favorite things we do. This question comes from Jonathan. TFL Classics. Ready?
Okay.
Would love to hear your thoughts on the Chevy Monte Carlo. I used to love them growing up and was reminded of my youthful obsession watching your Mercury Grand Marquis video. Probably not a great fit, but would love to hear Brendan and Tommy riff off in a TFL Classics pod amongst your range of topics. Thanks for the great content as always.
So I know that Tommy and I are, I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm guessing that Tommy and I are going to differ on this, but I actually kind of dig the Monte Carlo. I think I would prefer to have like a Pontiac Grand Prix over the Monte Carlo. But I get the attraction to it because I've driven the Grand Prix, and they're surprisingly comfortable. They get decent fuel economy. They're relatively reliable as far as GM vehicles go. And if you get the SS version, you can get that supercharged V6 that is pretty fun to drive, actually. But I want to know what your opinion is on the Monte Carlo.
Well, we need to talk about which Monte Carlo.
Yeah, I guess there are a lot of different generations of it. I guess I'm thinking of the last generation Monte Carlo.
So I like the 80s Monte Carlos a lot, like the G-body Monte Carlos from like 82 through 88. Really iconic, classic designs, right? Very well loved by many, many generations. There was an SS model as well, which was very, very cool. And even before that, I think the Monte Carlos were very attractive vehicles. Where I had a problem with them is where they started to move more toward the front-wheel drive platforms, like in
Sure.
95. And then the one I really dislike with a strong passion is the 2000 through 2005 Monte Carlo, where it looks like a box of melted crayons. And
At
then
least it doesn't smell like crayons like a Volkswagen.
yeah, but you like the later Monte Carlos, huh?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think I prefer the Grand Prix as far as styling goes, and plus the Grand Prix, you can get a 4-door version of it. And they're essentially underneath, when you're talking the last gen Monte Carlo, essentially underneath the same vehicle. Or like a Pontiac Bonneville, I think would also be really cool. Or even an Impala.
The 06, 07 Monte Carlos got back to being much cooler. I think they squared them off a little bit. But yeah, primarily the looks I don't like about the what generation is that? The 6th generation Monte Carlo.
I mean, it's one of those things where it is front-wheel drive, so the enthusiast factor of it is down because of the front-wheel drive. But if you're just talking about a car that's going to be your daily, they're pretty comfy to get around, and when you put your pedal to the floor, they move pretty good, honestly, especially if you got the supercharged version like the SS. Did you know they actually made a Dale Earnhardt edition of that?
Oh my gosh.
But it was really just kind of a sticker package on the Monte Carlo
Really?
SS.
So
Yeah.
if you're watching on YouTube, that is the Monte Carlo. Now I purposely put up a blurry image so it is less jarring to the eye.
Oh, gosh.
No, I mean, I understand why people like them. And you could get the 5.3 in these, right?
Oh, could you?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I guess in the
you
later
could get
ones,
them.
that's true, because I guess the Impala SS did move to the 5.3 as well. But here's the thing I do know, at least about the Impalas, I would assume it's the same with the Monte Carlos, is when they did move over to that 5.3, they didn't necessarily upgrade the transmission like they should. And so the transmissions are kind of known to grenade themselves, especially when you're like doing like a 30 to 60 launch. They have a tendency to go.
Okay. Good
Yeah.
to know. Good to know. And as you mentioned, you could also get the supercharged,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool. I like superchargers a
Yeah,
lot.
that's the one I would get. I would go before they switched over to the V8 and get that supercharged 3.8 because those 3.8s are just fantastic. Probably the best American V6 ever made.
I would get a 3rd gen Monte Carlo or a 4th gen. Those are my favorite. The really square ones from like the 70s through the 80s.
There you go.
Very, very cool. And the 90s too. So the Monte Carlo discussion over. So are you pro Monte Carlo?
I'm pro Monte Carlo.
I'm pro Monte Carlo with an asterisk.
Okay.
Just not 2000.
Pro some Monte Carlo.
Pro most Monte Carlos.
Okay.
Yes. That's right. All right. Should we go on to your number 7 choice?
Yeah, let's go on to number 7. So I decided to do the Mercedes CLS 55 AMG. And there's a bunch of Mercedes actually that you could find in here with a similar engine, similar price point, but I think the CLS is the best looking of the bunch, in my personal opinion. When these came out in 2004, they kind of, I think, revolutionized the idea of a coupe-styled sedan, And if you got the AMG version of it, you were treated with a 5.4-liter V8.
Treated?
Yes. And it had a supercharger on it, putting out 469 horsepower. And I just saw one sell on an auction site, to be named, for less than $10,000.
You like that, huh?
I do.
Let me pull it up. Oh, Brendan.
That's so good. It's the coupe sedan.
I'm not
and now they're all the rage.
Yes. I think the rear angle is gorgeous, right? The coupe sedan. You're right. That's a good way to put it because it's all the rage.
Yeah.
But the front end it's just not it. I mean, why the headlights are very phallic.
I think they're closer to like the Porsche Runny Egg.
Yes,
headlights.
This looks like something you would get in an adult entertainment store, the headlight on that thing. This came from the really bad era of Mercedes.
Okay.
The really under-engineered era where the quality went down and the cost-cutting went up. But if we're talking about a performance bargain, the power is impressive. And the engines are very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, 469 horsepower in a sedan where you can bring 3 of your friends along with you and impress them with your powerful V8 for less than $10,000.
Do you like the look?
I do like the look.
You like the look.
I know some people would prefer like the E55 AMG. Those actually tend to bring a little bit more money than the CLS. And I think that's simply because a lot of people have forgotten about the CLS.
We did drive, I think the facelift models look better, but we drove the 500, remember, at auction.
Oh, yes.
A while back, the CLS 500.
We did. It was a CLS
and
500.
It went like hell. I will say, it was that even the non-AMG model was a performance machine. I would venture, for even less money, if you want this era of Mercedes-Benz and an AMG, do apologize for the noise. They are doing some polishing outside.
Yeah, Tommy's getting his original Mini.
Yes, very
a nice buff and
very
polish.
spiffy, but it does sound like we are relieving ourselves of flatulence in the studio.
Yeah, if you guys can hear it. Sorry about that.
Yes, I would pitch to you that the ML55 is in some ways cheaper and more interesting.
It's cheaper, but it's not as fast. Those only had, 350 something
like
horsepower?
That. Yeah, the naturally aspirated.
And it's much heavier.
It's not as good around a turn, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, they're cool. I will grant you that. The ML55 is cool. They are cheaper, and they're probably more reliable, but I would rather be seen in a CLS.
In a CLS.
Yes.
You're a CLS kind of guy, huh?
Well, when you pull up in an ML55, the vast majority of people just think it's an old ML because it doesn't look that different from the other MLs. It was pretty understated for the time, and so a lot of people just think like, oh, it's just someone driving around an old SUV. You pull up in a CLS,
and they're gonna think,
ooh, that guy's got money.
This guy hates his bank account.
Yes.
That's what they're going to think. Now, the next car on our list is a car I am completely on board with. It is the Pontiac, the Trans Am. There's Brendan standing proud in front of it. But we're talking specifically about the 1990s through the very early 2000s version of the Trans Am.
Yeah, so there was a refresh in the middle of there, but even if you got the early versions, I think these are great vehicles. They originally came with the LT1 V8, and later had the LS1 V8, and I think the LS ones are definitely more desirable. But I will say the LT1s aren't to be slept on either. They are still plenty powerful, not quite as reliable, but they are a heck of a lot cheaper.
Yeah, 100%. Now, this is the 4th gen Trans Am, 1993 through 2002. And these are some of the funkiest designs out there. Now, I've said in previous episodes that I do not much love the design.
Yeah.
Just because I've always thought it was a little blobby and weird. But now that every car looks the same, it's a pretty cool design. The F-body Trans Am's really kind of coming out in its own.
Well, and here's the thing. This is prior to, like with the Mustang we talked about. That Mustang was a harken back to the original Mustang, right? It wasn't necessarily an original design idea, whereas the 4th gen Camaro, I think, was kind of like the last Camaro that was like the original design idea. That was so different from any other Camaro out there, and still very different from just about any other car that's ever been made, to be honest with you. It's such a unique look out there, and I think it's cool that you could have that where they were still thinking about futuristic design.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's not retro at all. And that certainly applies to the Firebird as well. The Camaro and the Firebird are sibling cars.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, certain versions of this car have gotten very expensive. So the later ones, 98 through 02, had the LS1 engine. And if you got what they called the WS6, which is like the handling package and the high performance package, I mean, you're going to be spending in some cases 20, 25, 30 grand.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Now, ours is a 95 does have, some suspension factory upgrades and brake factory upgrades, and it is what they call the Comp TA, which is like it was a special edition to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the BF Goodrich Comp TA tire. We bought ours for just under $7,000, and it's a hell of a lot of car for the money.
It is, and I know recently, since we actually just did a drag race, I don't know if that video is out yet, but it will be soon on the TFL Classics YouTube channel. I think this was like maybe one of your first times of ever actually spending a long period of driving it. And I want to know what your opinion on it was, actually getting in and finally driving it to see what it's like to go down the road.
Well, the interior is made out of the same stuff they make the Happy Meals toys out of. I mean, it's just like the nastiest, cheapest plastics, but it is a very, very interesting driving experience. You got this enormous hood that extends like 3 feet beyond the front wheels, enormous dashboard, huge windows with glass T-tops, and it was really good. I mean, it's definitely not as handling oriented as a C4 or C5 Corvette.
Right.
Like, you can feel the solid axle kind of hopping around. The spring rate is definitely softer for a more comfortable ride, but the engine's wonderful. So ours has the LT1, which it's rated at like 305, 310 horsepower back in the day, but it's got this nice chunky low torque band under like 4,000 or 5,000 RPM. So you just hit the throttle, even in the lower RPMs, it'll drag itself out of bed, and then it's got a 6-speed manual, which just feels great. Good brakes. Yeah, great car. Love it. Especially if you get an early one. Avoid the craziness with the WS6 hype. Get an early one with the 5.7. You're going to have a pretty good time.
Yeah, I think they're definitely a performance car bargain, hence why they made this list.
All right, we got more questions. Listen to all the questions we've been having today, Brendan.
Nice.
I have lost the questions.
Oh, no.
I do not know where they have gone. They have completely disappeared from my phone.
Well, and I just want to say, so if you want your question for sure read on air, check us out over on patreon.com. What is it on Patreon? TFL Car? Or is it?
Yeah, it's patreon.com/TFL Car, or send us an email, and we'll try to get to your questions. That would be info@tflcar.com. Yeah, 100%. Okay. I think I found the question here. This is an email from Josh.
Okay.
All right, ready?
I'm ready.
I am in the market, speaking of Trans Ams, for a mid-1990s Ford Mustang or Chevrolet Camaro. Sorry, my brain just shot out there. I've got roughly $10,000 to spend. Love the videos. Great drag races. What would you recommend? Mid-90s Mustang, mid-90s Camaro.
Camaro.
Oh, man.
My wife is going to hate me for that.
The age-old Mustang Camaro debate.
Yeah. I think if you're looking at the mid-90s specifically, the Camaro was just measurably better in every way.
Well, it was faster.
It was faster, yes. And I think it looks better too, honestly. If you're going for, like, if you wanted to switch over to like maybe the early 2000s, like the New Edge, or when they redesigned it in 2005, I would probably venture to say Mustang. But if you are talking mid-90s, I think it's an easy Camaro decision.
Interesting. Wow. Easy for you. Now, granted, horsepower wars. The Camaro won by a huge margin.
Oh, yes.
I mean, like a Mustang GT in 97 was making 215 horsepower, whereas, Trans Ams and Camaro SSs were making 285, 300 horsepower in a lot of cases. And then, of course, Ford came out with the Cobra, which everyone complained about. And then they came out with the Terminator. Right? Am I getting my order right? And then the Mach 1s, and then they got really cool. But horsepower in the mid-90s, certainly GM was winning. The Fords do have a lot of reliability. So those 2-valve 4.6s, they're not very quick, but they sound cool and they go forever.
That I will say. The Mustang has always, in my opinion, sounded better going down the road than the Camaro has. But I think as far as driving experience goes, the Camaro wins, at least for the mid-90s. Again, I think if you were to go over to like the New Edge Mustang, now if you're looking at the Cobra on the New Edge, it's a totally different ballpark as far as price goes. But they were smoking the Camaros.
So you're a Camaro? I'm saying Mustang.
Really?
Those SN95s are warming up to me.
Yeah?
I love the one we owned. Yeah, I mean, they're not as fast, but just the way they make you feels pretty good. Okay. One more comment here from Jason. Sent us an email. I wanted to add one feature you guys missed. We did a podcast talking about classic car features we wish would come back.
Oh, yeah.
Car window, and specifically rear window louvers.
Rear window. Oh, like on minivans.
It harkens back to my 16-year-old lust after a 1982 Datsun 280CX for sale on the side of the road between Lafayette and Broomfield. Needless to say, my parents weren't on board with this idea or the massive increase in their car insurance rates. No, not on minivans. You say like on minivans? Brandon,
like
not
how you
at
just
all
caught
like
that.
on minivans. Not at all like on minivans.
Well, yeah. No, he said rear window louvers.
Louvers.
I'm sorry. I'm picturing when you pop out the rear windows a little bit. Oh, okay. So the louvers that actually go over the rear windows. Yeah, that would be funny to see a minivan with rear window louvers.
We're over here. Side pipes. Brendan's like on minivans. Oh, my goodness.
Well, no, I would say louvers are pretty cool. I think Case and I just talked about that in the last podcast, actually, that if I were to get one of those third-gen Camaros, that I would get it with the rear window louvers because it's a very like 70s and 80s look to have those rear window louvers. We actually, or I just reviewed a Volvo that had those rear window louvers. That's up on TFL Classics right now. And yeah, it's a good look.
It's a good look.
I mean, it limits your visibility a little bit, but
It's a good look.
it looks good.
Yeah, I agree. All right, guys, it's time for yet another ad break. And this time, we don't know what's happening still again.
Yeah.
We don't know what ad is going to
Or
play.
even if there's going to be an ad at all. Some of you
Yeah,
won't get any.
sometimes the ad breaks just don't happen.
Yeah.
So you'll either hear us in 30 seconds or you'll hear us immediately, in which case it'll just be very awkward.
Yeah. Either way, we'll be right back.
And we're back from our ad break. We hope you enjoyed it, or if it didn't work, you just heard us, in which case we just looked very stupid.
Either way, thanks for listening and thanks for staying with us.
And we're back with yet another affordable performance bargain.
Yeah.
The Audi S4. Brendan picked a lot of cars which are going to be very expensive to maintain. He's like, I want cheap entry, but it to bankrupt you over a lot. Next up, it's going to be like Range Rover Supercharged.
Oh, gosh. You know I wouldn't put a Range Rover on this list. No, the Audi S4... So I'm specifically talking about like the B6 or B7 S4. When they went away from that terrible 2.7 liter bi-turbo V6 and switched over to the 4.2 liter V8 engine. And it's a really cool car. I mean, you're talking, they went from a twin turbo 6 to like a muscly V8 sedan or coupe or hatchback because I'm sorry, not hatchback, sedan, coupe, or convertible, because they made it in all three forms.
Did they do a coupe? Do you mean wagon?
You're right.
Yeah.
I mean a wagon.
Sedan, wagon, and convertible.
So, yeah.
You'll get there, Brendan.
I'll get there.
You're just
Sorry,
naming all
guys.
the names.
I'm just totally coming out of left field here, but they made it in a lot of different versions, and it was, I think, probably my favorite of the S4s. And in fact, you actually got a chance to ride in a wagon with a 6-speed manual, if you remember.
Yes, I sure did. And it was very cool. It was a B7.
Yep, so the newer version. And the B7s, I think, are very similar to the B6. They're actually based on the same platform.
Did the B6 have a V8 too in the S? Oh,
they
really?
did.
Oh, yeah. So you made it sound like the V8 is way better than the twin turbo V6.
Well, it's marginally more reliable.
Yeah, but so with the twin turbo V6 to fix the timing belts, the whole front end of the car had to come off.
Yeah.
Remember the B7, the timing device was all the way at the firewall, and then the whole front of the car had to come off, and also the engine, which is not so good.
But you don't have turbos that can blow.
You don't have the turbos in the V8 car. That's a good point. I liked it a lot. I mean, it wasn't that fast by modern standards, but it made some great noises. That 4.2 liter makes some cool crack, snap, crackle, and the pop snaps and the crinkles.
Hey, we're both going off the edges here.
What's that saying?
Snap, crackle, pop.
Crinkle, snapple, plip.
If your car is making plip sounds, I'd be a little concerned, to be honest with you.
Well, it's snap,
crackle,
papple,
pop.
crop.
Snap, crackle. Now you got me all messed up.
Snap, pap, crapple.
But I think you're talking about Rice Krispies, not a V8
that's
engine.
right. Okay.
Yeah, but it gives you the pops and the burbles of a good old, muscly V8 with a 6. You could get it with a 6-speed manual. The vast majority of them actually came with automatics, so the manuals are quite rare and do fetch a premium over the automatics.
It's a lot of weight to be holding over the front of that car, though.
Yeah.
But quattro all-wheel drive, which was good.
Yep.
Pretty good interior, bucket seats. Yeah, that's a cool car.
It's a cool car. Just
also save
however
some
much,
money.
Yeah, however much you spend on the car, save an equal amount of money in your bank account.
Can we
just for the repairs that could happen down the road.
We just recommended a car where you need to save the same amount of money to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you may want to do that with the E9335 as well, to be honest with you.
Have you considered a 1994 Celica?
Well, that would be reliable. That's a good reliable vehicle.
It's
but
not a lot of fun, is it? Performance bargains.
But it's not a performance bargain for sure.
This one is, though, the MazdaSpeed3.
Absolutely.
Are we talking first gen or second gen?
Well, they're both pretty similar, but I prefer the non-smiley face first gens that came out in 2007 and sold through 2009. They both had the same 2.3 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder that was just a straight up hoot to drive.
Wow, great word. Hoot.
A hoot. You can go hooting down the road in your 263 horsepower front wheel drive hot hatch.
Now, why are you recommending the first gen Speed 3 but not the second?
It's not that I'm not recommending the second gen. It's simply that if you look at the front end of a second gen, it looks like a big, goofy, smiley face. And once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. And that is the problem.
Okay. It's faster, though.
Is it? By how much?
Well, maybe it's not. It made more power.
Yeah.
Definitely made more power. I remember that we had a second gen on loan, and the most notable thing about the second gen is that it would steer itself anywhere it wanted except in a straight line.
Yeah.
The torque steer was immense. And the first gen had the same issue too. But I remember it was, I want to say, close to 300 horsepower in the Speed 3 in the second gen.
Was it?
It was a lot of power, maybe 250, and it was way more than the equivalent GTI. 263 horsepower. But at that time, that was oh my God.
So that's the same as the first gen then.
Is it really?
Yeah.
What the heck?
I think they use the exact same engine in both gens. And I think actually they use the exact same engine in the MazdaSpeed6. But the MazdaSpeed6 was significantly heavier.
Oh, you're right.
Because it also had all-wheel drive. Hence why the MazdaSpeed3 is actually faster.
Yeah, I am just all over the board. It is 263 horsepower in the second. Is that the same as the first gen? Yes, yeah, so get the first one. It doesn't look like it's smiling.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's smiling, and it's just I think more of a timeless design.
But it doesn't have the hood scoop.
That's true. You are missing out on the hood scoop. And the other question I have, and you know what? The first gen is actually faster. You want to know why?
Because it's lighter.
Yeah, it's 100 pounds lighter.
Yeah. The one thing I will say about the first gen is from the rear three quarters, they look like Subaru WRXs. To me.
Yeah, kind of.
The old wagons, remember?
Although I will say the
hatchbacks.
The MazdaSpeed, I think, has a much better looking rear window.
Than the Subarus?
It's a much bigger, it almost looks from the back to me kind of, and this may detract some of you, minivan-esque.
Yep.
But I kind of dig it.
So number 3 on the list, I think there's a mistake. Someone's written the word Crossfire SRT6.
Yeah. In one of our podcasts, you asked me if I liked the Crossfire, and maybe I'm coming around a little bit because the SRT6 was the performance version of the Crossfire. Now, unfortunately, you could only get these in an automatic, but as most of you may know, this was based on the Mercedes-Benz SLK.
Yeah.
But the SRT6 got the supercharged 3.2-liter V6, putting out 330 horsepower and 310 pound-feet of torque, known to do a 0 to 60 in less than 5 seconds.
So these were manufactured during the Daimler Chrysler era, built in Germany, in Osnabrück, by Carmen. Ever heard the word Carmen?
Carmen Ghia?
Carmen Ghia, same Carmen.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the engine was the M112 supercharged V6, which was it's a Mercedes engine, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole car is a Mercedes car, just with a different kind of front end. I actually think the design on these is pretty freaking cool.
Yeah.
The outside is cool. The inside is silver everywhere, but it felt like the Happy Meal toy returns. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and so the Crossfire came out in 2004, but you had to wait until 2005 to get the SRT6 version, and they made that only for 2 years, 2005 and 2006. So it's kind of a rare bird.
And auto only?
Auto only.
Auto
That's the one
only.
that's kind of the wah.
But the Crossfire you could get in a stick.
You could, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, those had just the standard 3.2 liter V6, but it only put out like 215 horsepower, and I just don't think that's good enough to make the list of performance car bargains.
Not enough. Would you get an SRT6?
Probably not.
Okay.
I would probably go SLK 55 AMG, I guess.
Okay.
But I had already had a Mercedes on the list, and so I didn't feel right putting another Mercedes on the list because I think that the other Mercedes is definitely faster, the CLS 55 AMG. But if I wanted to go for something convertible Mercedes-ish that's super fast, that's probably what I would go with.
The issue with the Crossfire is it was based on the first generation of the SLK, which is the R170, which was pretty dumpy,
Yeah.
you know?
It does look better than the first generation SLK. I will say that.
You think so? Yeah. The first gen SLK kind of looks like it's sucking an egg. And the 32, look at that. Do you see that? It's like two eyes and there's like an egg in its mouth.
It's true, I guess.
It's not very good. But the AMG version was much better looking, the SLK 32. Yeah, I'm on board with this. I love this era of SRT cars, though, because like the number at the end was the number of cylinders. So there's SRT4.
It made sense.
Which was Neon and Caliber.
Yep.
And then I think the only SRT6 was the Crossfire.
Yes.
And then
correct.
there was Magnum, Charger, Challenger in the 8. Oh, Grand Cherokee.
Yep.
Oh, and there was a 10.
There was a 10. Oh, that's right.
The SRT10.
The Ram.
Yeah.
The Ram SRT10.
That was a cool era. Now SRT doesn't exist anymore.
That's so sad.
Isn't
It's
that
the same,
sad?
It went the same way as MazdaSpeed. They need to bring back both MazdaSpeed and SRT.
Yeah.
I think.
So, fun fact. The guy who designed this guy named Eric Stoddard. Yeah, Eric Stoddard designed what other sports car from the 2010s? You're going to look at my screen, aren't you? Is
No,
it perhaps
I won't look. I won't look. You tell me, Tommy. What was it?
Hyundai Genesis Coupe?
Really? Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's a better design, personally.
You do?
Yeah, they're terribly unreliable, but I think they look good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. He also designed the Dodge Viper in 03.
Oh, wow.
Good design. The Pacifica, not as good. And then the Sebring.
Wait, which Pacifica?
I think the first gen Pacifica.
Oh, gross.
You didn't like the...
Those are terrible.
Now, that was an interesting car.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about the first gen Pacifica ever?
I see them at the auction every now and then, and they're just usually like in the worst possible shape. I literally saw one that the entire seat was duct tape.
The
whole seat, the bottom part and the back part was just all duct tape. Somebody I think they got bored with a roll of duct tape and decided to put it all over their entire seat.
It was designed in kind of alongside the M-Class Mercedes. It sold pretty darn well. It had some interesting things, the Pacifica, if I remember right. But yeah, I don't mind the Pacifica. Look at that beauty. Ash, that's hideous. It's a terrible looking car.
What are you doing?
I haven't seen one in so long, I forgot what they look like.
They're terrible.
Yeah. All right, before we get to top two, we got one more question.
Okay. Well, didn't we get an email from someone about a splash?
You want to go over the email? That's a good one. It might be lost forever.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no.
Did you close my tab?
I may have closed your tab. Oh, wait, I think it's over here.
Well, I know one of our viewers reached out because I have an affinity for the first-gen Explorers. And the Explorer, as some of you may know, is also based on, the Explorer is based on the Ranger platform, which is their Ford's small truck. And they bought a Ford Ranger Splash, which I think is kind of an appearance package that they did in the 90s on that Ford Ranger. And I think it's pretty cool.
I got it. I figured it out. Yeah, Ranger Splash. Here we go. Now I just got to get the picture over here. Oh, boom. Look at that. It is a cool. So this is a gentleman named Victor sent us an email. Yeah, he bought this early Ranger Splash, and it had these really cool graphics that say Splash. And this was also a step side, so it's got a little step in the back.
I do like the step side.
I like these Rangers a lot. These early Rangers are such good little trucks. So underrated. You see them not as frequently as you used to. I remember these used to be everywhere, these Rangers. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And they kind of have disappeared a little bit off the face of the earth.
Well, and I know he asked the question on one of our one of our podcasts about what to look for in a transmission, is like what are some of the telltale signs that it's going out. And the thing that I told him was, along with driving it, to pull that dipstick out and give it a good old whiff. Smell it, and if it has like a burnt smell to it, like a burnt fluid smell, run away, because those transmissions are not great. And generally any transmission, if you smell that dipstick that comes out of there and it smells burnt, that means they haven't changed their fluid in a while, or there's a major problem going on in that transmission. Either way, if it's an auto, I would shy away from those.
Well, or you can tell slippage. So like if it like feels like it flares is a word for it, like it shifts gears, and before it engages the next gear, it kind of goes.
Exactly.
Or if it bangs, or if it takes a long time to engage forward or reverse from park. There's a lot of things that can go wrong.
Yeah, a lot of little things for sure.
It's one thing I noticed about going to these used car auctions is that it seems like if a car has a major issue, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a transmission related issue.
Yeah, I see that a lot, especially with the newer stuff. Believe it or not, the
power shift automatics.
Yeah, like the power shift automatics. We just did a video on this that's going on TFL Car, talking about the power shift automatics in the last gen Fiestas and Focuses. At least the ones that we got here in the States, they decided for whatever reason to put a dual clutch transmission in an economy car, and an overly complicated one at that literally has like a failure rate of about just under 100%.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it was a terrible decision. It was a dry clutch, dual clutch, versus some of the newer ones, which are wet clutch. So it just didn't do well at low speed maneuvering, and then clutch packs would go out and input shafts would fail, and it was just a mess. So don't get the power shift transmission. They extended the warranty, actually. I just learned this because of Brendan's research. 70,000 miles on the transmission.
100,000 miles.
100,000 on the transmission?
Yeah, on
and
the
then
transmission.
150 on the...
On the body control module, which is pretty much the culprit. The body control module, which is the computer that controls the transmission's shift functions, tends to go out. And when that goes out, it tells it to go into like random gears. And when it does go into random gear, it grenades it.
Yeah.
Because it'll just basically money shift itself.
Yeah, not good.
Yeah.
You had one actually with the bad body, with the bad module.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's weird because the transmission actually still worked perfectly fine, and the module was bad on the Fiesta that I had gotten. Thankfully, I got it really cheap, so I was able to get out of it for what I got into it. But it just kind of shifted weird. It's like the transmission didn't know what to gear to be in, so it was just kind of like random. You'd be driving around, and all of a sudden it would like go from second to fourth or fourth to sixth or whatever. But the problem is those control modules, they are under warranty for 150,000 miles or 10 years, but they're just not available.
Yeah.
Because they've had such a high failure rate. You can't get those.
Yeah. It's interesting. Okay, number 2 in the performance bargain, although not as much as a bargain as it used to be, but the first-gen Boxster, the 986, sold from the late 90s through 2004, and I think you have the Boxster S on here.
Yeah, I'm specifically talking about the Boxster S because when I was researching this, I saw one sell. Granted, I think it had like 130,000 miles on it, which is a little bit on the higher end for a Boxster S. It sold for less than 10 grand.
Oh, it's really cheap.
And that's on one of the big auction sites. So I think maybe the prices are coming back down a little bit to reality on these, because on some vehicles, prices have come back down a little bit.
Yeah, they were really high on Boxster S's for a while.
They were. I think this is one of them. So I think now might be the time to get in, because this is a way to get into a Porsche that has like the perfect weight balance with the engine being behind you rather than all the way on the butt of the car. And if you get the S, they got a pretty potent little engine too. In 2000 when they came out, they had 247 horsepower in this lightweight car. But if you got a 2003 or newer, they had 254 horsepower.
Wow. We owned a 99 2.5 liter non-S, and it was such a nice little car to drive, but it was really slow. So that car had 201 horsepower, and it didn't quite have the push you'd expect out of a car with the Porsche badge on it, but the handling was great. Mid-engined, of course. That one had a 5-speed manual. Quality is pretty good on these, too. Like, they're pretty reliable. Few things. IMS bearings everyone freaks out about, but not as big of an issue as people make it seem. And then you got to love kind of the fried egg look.
Sure.
You like the fried eggs?
I don't mind it, actually. Well, and speaking to the IMS bearings, it's one of those things where these cars came out over 20 years ago now. So they've either been addressed or they're just not going to break.
Right, they're not going to break.
So it's one of those things where if you were buying it in 2005, it's an issue you should be worried about because it could go wrong at any time. But now in 2023, you're probably in the clear. And that's why I think it's a good car to get. And I think about this, the one you had only had 201 horsepower. If you could get it with 247 horsepower,
It's a big jump.
it's a pretty big jump.
Yeah.
It's such a small car.
Yeah, I think it's a fun car. Yeah, interiors are kind of crummy too. They're just kind of plasticky, but yeah, great handling.
Yeah.
And convertible tops. I got a question for you.
Sure.
What's going on with your Yukon?
My Yukon?
Has the Yukon drama finally come to an end?
It's subsiding. I don't really have a significant update. I did get the 4x4 selector installed, and it is working properly. It is the next to go up to my mechanic, actually. I may be bringing it up this weekend to the mechanic to finally get the suspension addressed.
What's going on with the suspension?
It needs everything as far as I know. I know it needs all new shocks. It needs some bushings, and because my tires are cupping on there. And I want to put new tires on it, but I also don't want to ruin those tires. So I want to address the suspension first. So that's the next step.
So 300,000 mile, 8.1 liter Yukon.
Yep.
350,000 mile Camry wagon. Which one has held up better?
Oof. Well, I will say I think the Camry has held up better, but it's also a much simpler machine without a lot of, it doesn't have 4x4. It doesn't have all the creature comforts of the Yukon. So it's in its design, it's probably going to be more reliable because there's less to break.
Gotcha.
If you think about it that way.
Yeah. And the Pontiac Vibe GT, the high performance 1.8 liter Pontiac with the engine-ish, more or less, from a Lotus Elise.
Yeah. We recently I did 2 videos on it. One maybe up right before this podcast.
It will be, yep.
Yeah. Where you guys get introduced to my Vibe GT. Pretty cool machine. It pretty much everything is fixed on it. It runs great now. And it's time to sell it. So
Now,
it may even be sold by the time this podcast comes out.
We've talked about it in the past.
Yeah.
Does the Vibe GT, did it live up to the hype?
No.
No.
Yeah. I mean,
It didn't.
Here's the thing. It is surprisingly comfortable.
Yeah, very comfortable.
They're very reliable vehicles.
Because they're Toyotas, the Matrix.
They're just not that fast.
Even the GT trim.
Even the GT trim. At 180 horsepower, I guess I expected more. I mean, we are up here at elevation where naturally aspirated engines do get strangled a lot by our thinner air. But I don't know. It's like my Mini Cooper with the 160 horsepower engine felt so much faster.
Okay. Transmission, 6-speed manual.
Yeah.
But doesn't help very. Is it just too slow? Is that your big issue with it?
That's it. Honestly, yeah, it's fun to drive. It's got a good little sound to it. It's very practical. It's comfortable. It's reliable. It gets good MPGs. It's got all the things going for it to make it like a great first car. If you're a young enthusiast, I think you'd be hard-pressed to get a better car or a better first car than a Pontiac Vibe GT. But for me, that's had all of these other fun cars,
Doesn't live up to the hype.
there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you heard it here first on the TFL Classics podcast, and we're bringing it home with number 1, the best affordable bang for your buck performance car, the C5 generation of the Corvette, built from the late 90s through the early 2000s, the fiberglass beast. Why is this number 1?
So this is number 1 because you guys have graciously let me drive it now on a few occasions. Not only does this have the reliability of an LS engine, it's also, in my opinion, probably the most comfortable Corvette that they've made.
Yep.
I've now sat in both the C4, the C6, and the C7. And this one is by far the one that I would want to take like on a longer drive. Which for those of you that are a little bit older, maybe have some back problems or some hip problems going on, if you wanted a car that you could enjoy and maybe take to the track every now and then, but still be comfortable and not have you in pain after driving, this is the one to get.
Yeah, great cars, right? And people look at them and are like, oh, it's just a car show for old guys. But a lot of technology in it, from the balsa wood floor to the rear-mounted transmission, the revolutionary at the time LS1 V8, advanced suspension, great handling, and it was, like you said, comfortable. It has these big lounging chairs, and they like change their character so much depending on whether they got like an automatic or stick or a coupe or a hardtop or convertible or a Z06. There's a little bit of everything in a C5 Corvette.
Yeah, and so these LS1s put out 345 horsepower, or 350, depending on what year you got. Which, honestly, for how light of a car this is plenty. I know the Z06s have shot up in value recently, and so that's why I didn't put it on this list, primarily because of the price.
Yeah.
I think that just the standard C5 Corvette is a better bargain for your money. It rides softer. You have more options of what you'd like to get, whereas the C6, you're stuck with that coupe.
Yeah, you can get so in the C5 they had a convertible, a coupe, and then they had a fixed roof coupe.
Yeah.
Which is what the Z06 was. The fun thing about the fixed roof coupe is it was actually its own model for a while before it became the Z06.
Interesting.
And what the goal with the FRC, as people call it internally, was they wanted to develop a Corvette that would be cheaper. So they're going to do a Corvette with roll-up windows, no cruise control, like very basic, lightweight,
Really?
an enthusiast Corvette. And then by the time they ran it past the bean counters, they're like, no one's going to buy a Corvette with roll-up windows. So they sold it with power windows and cruise control. And then the price is just like a little cheaper than the coupe. And
Okay.
you didn't have the Targa top panel. So they kind of canned that, and then they brought it back as a Z06.
Yeah, and when they came out with the Z06, we're talking a 405 horsepower,
Oh, yeah.
naturally aspirated V8, and that's great, but
Expensive.
yeah, you're realistically, you're probably going to spend what, 7-8 grand more just to get an extra 50 horsepower. Whereas I would just say get a C5, some minor modifications for a heck of a lot less money.
Yeah.
And you're going to have just as much, if not more, fun than owning the Z06.
I think ours was like so ours is a 99 with 40,000 miles on it, and it was like 14 grand. Now, granted, it's an automatic, but a manual's going to be maybe a couple grand more.
Sure.
So $17,000 manual C5 Corvette. All the reliability of the LS1 plus the handling of the Corvette. It's a great choice.
A few months ago, I saw a 200,000 mile
Yeah?
C5 Corvette go across the auction block at the auction. And I remember that it sold for only $6,000.
Oh, wow. That would have
Yeah.
been a good deal.
Yeah.
Was it rough, though?
The interior was rough, but it ran okay.
Yeah.
I think it's just that kind of tells you the build quality of the materials that GM was using back then maybe wasn't the best.
On the inside.
Yeah,
Yeah,
on
but
the
the mechanical
inside, but the
bits are really
mechanical were
good.
good.
They're
Yeah.
really good.
Exactly.
Well, folks, let us know what you think of our list of affordable classics. Be sure to email us your questions, or if you definitely want them answered, send them to us over at Patreon. And as always, this has been Tommy.
And Brendan.
We'll see you on another episode of the TFL Classics podcast.
You're just dropping the ball right
I
there
forgot,
at the end, Tommy.
forgot what we were doing. Is this a podcast? Is this a video? It could be both, depending on where
And
you're.
of course, your source for breakfast talk.
Breakfast talk every Wednesday.
And the Nissan hardbody. Can't
Oh,
forget
we
the
almost
Nissan
forgot.
hardbody.
The best performance classic, the D21 Nissan truck.
Absolutely.
Whew,
You all
we
need to go
almost
buy
went-
one.
Did you talk about it with Case last
I
week?
did, yes.
Okay, good. Greg, you keep up the tradition of the hard body conversation.
We'll keep it going. All right, guys. Take care. Catch you on the next one.